It takes two to lie. One to lie and one to listen. Homer Simpson. Hello, this is Pat Coakley, and this is episode 132 of Podsnacks, ArtoftheDiet.com. And this week, we're going to talk about the art of lying to oneself, not just to the entire nation, but just to oneself, and what truths I've concluded about my month free of sugar and 3 weeks free of any grains whatsoever. So let's do the update. So there was another great quote, I thought, about lies that I came across this week. And, well, several of them. And I'm going to give you them all. And then, if it isn't already obvious why I'm focusing in on this, it will become apparent afterwards. And the first one is, he entered the territory of lies without a passport for return. Graham Greene, a novelist. The liar's punishment is not in the least that he is not believed, but that he cannot believe anyone else. George Bernard Shaw. And I'm going to start with George Bernard Shaw because I honestly thought this week that there is a downside to all of this current president's lying. And the downside, outside of the obvious corruption of citizens' belief systems and distortions of all of that, but one of the impacts of somebody who has this chronic a problem is that he really must not look at anyone around him either as capable of telling him the truth. And that must, think about it yourself when you're trying to navigate this world and trying to decide who you can trust. And in fact, if you are such an inveterate liar, you probably don't really trust people to tell you the truth either, or always wonder what their motives is. It must be quite something to see the flip side of this. And why am I thinking about this other than the obvious craziness that is coming forth, spewing forth on Twitter every day? That weight maintenance is, in essence, a matter of telling the truth and not telling yourself lies. One of the truths that I really believe, and it seems to be backed up by science, and that is that once you have been a roller coaster dieter, gaining, losing, your system biologically is altered from your initial state when you weren't overweight. And that systemic change is that it wants to go back to the weight where it felt at peace. And that may have been at a heavier weight. And it doesn't care about healthy foods. It doesn't care about how your cholesterol numbers are down. It doesn't care about how your knees feel better and you can get up and walk and exercise. It doesn't care anything about that. It simply just wants those pounds back. And I think there's a lot of scientific research that suggests why that is, and it has to do with hormones and leptin and things like that that make my head crack just trying to grasp them. But the overall message to me was that maintaining a 60-pound weight loss for me is an uphill battle. It's not on a horizontal plane. And it's certainly not, once you achieve the weight loss, just a downward easy ride. It is an uphill battle. And this past week, I realized a couple of things about the having no sugar for a month and also not having grains, processed grains, or even whole wheat and good grains for 3 weeks. And that is that it is simply easier for me to manage my appetite for food without these food groups. It is flat out easier. I don't think about food as much. I don't have the cravings. I don't see something and find it irresistible. It is something that I suppose normal people experience. They may have other triggers for them. It may be shopping, booze, sex, something or other. But, it is a sort of view of food that doesn't often come my way. And so when it comes, I really do have to take note of it and say, you know what? This is easier to manage food this way. The downside of this is, of course, the downside of any eating plan for someone who has this issue. At some point, despite it being easier, despite enjoying the food that you're eating, your body simply wants those pounds back. And so if you're not going to give it sugar and processed grains and whatnot, it'll help you get that weight back by eating healthy foods. So the truth telling that I had to give myself this week was, yes, it is easier to manage. And yes, I have to manage it. There's an article in the New York Times, and I'll leave it on the show notes page at www.ArtoftheDiet.com/132. And the article basically says that it's not the quantity of food, it's the quality of food. And they did a rather extensive study. It's a legit study, I think. And what it proved was that people who were on a low-carb diet or a higher-fat diet, when they were given instructions not to write things down and not to keep track of portions, but they were not able to have sugar or processed grains or all of that stuff in their diet. They just had the choices from the low-fat world or from the higher-fat world. And so, in other words, some variation of dairy, cheese, and meats and fats and oils, and some variations of no-fat foods, fruits and vegetables in both, but and grains in both, but just not the processed grains and not sugar and snacky kind of food. And what they showed was that the groups at the end of this period of time had lost weight, and many of them said that it was easier for them to lose weight this way because they simply weren't struggling with it. They were eating and not hungry. They weren't necessarily watching their portions, and that it worked in this short term. Now, they didn't say how long a period it was, and as we know, the devil is in just how long somebody is able to do this. But initially, they said that they adjusted to it with less stress and less feeling of deprivation than they have on previous diets. And I think that is the attractiveness of, to me, I'm eating a higher fat kind of diet right at the moment. And without the sugars and without the grains. And so satiation is not the problem. But I have to say that I would love it to be self-regulating, as this article suggests. But it's not. Because even though I'm not hungry, maybe my portions start getting larger. I have to watch the limits of this. And I think this article is appealing to all of us who want something to be self-regulating without it being an authority, supervisory person coming in and checking that portion control. And I had to admit this week that I simply have to do that portion control, even with these healthy foods. And one particular food I'm thinking of is, I think I mentioned it before, the cauliflower fried rice, which sort of tastes almost like, Chinese fried rice without it being a grain product. But it is a carbohydrate product in the sense of the vegetable. And if you eat too much of it, a system like mine, it's too many carbs. And they don't talk about that necessarily on programs like this because you're eating, after all is said and done, it's cauliflower that you're eating. But if your system is fine-tuned and you've lost the weight, and that body of yours simply wants that weight back, and it does not care how you try to fool it. It wants it back. I just have to accept that there is no road that is not going to require an adult to be in the room. And I've got to be that adult. And what I've concluded is that it's easier for me to be the adult when I don't introduce these foods into my diet. And it gives me an opportunity to be very clear-headed about, really, do you need a whole cup of that cauliflower rice? Wouldn't a half a cup be just fine? And then make it up with salad or some other version of good food. And so that's going to be my goal for the next month, is to maintain this. And I really am not struggling to maintain it, but I do notice that if I overdo it with something like the cauliflower fried rice or cauliflower bread, I have learned how to use cauliflower in ways that my family in heaven are going, what has happened to this girl? Really? I used to flee from the house, any house that was cooking cauliflower. But I really do need to monitor that type of food and be stricter about that control than like salad control. The protein, I don't seem to want to overdo the protein as much as I do these sorts of dishes. And as you may know, quite a few of the recipes for these kind of foods are stews, are combinations of foods to make them look good, to make them taste good. And they are, in fact, good. And they do taste good. But the portions are a little bit more generous than someone like myself can afford. So I did some truth telling, and overall, I'm very happy I started this. And I do see the results. They're not, world saber rattling results, but the trend is where I want it to be going. And I don't get beset by cravings or any of that stuff. And I think I have more mental space for other things. So that's the update on that. But I got, what's the word? I guess because it's all in the news, the Russian hacking of the American democracy system through Facebook, through bots, through fake ads, through creating groups. God knows, it's so extensive. And I got hacked this week. My websites, patcoakley.com, theartofthediet.com, thephotogardner.com. It was a mess. It was down and it was not available. And I think even as I speak on Tuesday, February 20th, I'm not sure iTunes is even recognizing the podcast link at this point. So I may just have to send it out in an email. So P.S. if you've not signed up for my email, and that's available on the website itself, ArtoftheDiet.com, it might be the best thing to do, because I'll at least be able to communicate with you and give you a link to the podcast directly from my podcast provider that doesn't rely on iTunes. But at any rate, it was astonishing how disruptive this hacking was. And I couldn't help but realize that, wow, I don't believe the Russians are trying to get into my accounts. But when you experience something as disruptive in your life as this, and then you read about these 13 or 14 indictments that of Russian folks who have been doing these deeds with respect to the American democracy system and trying to push their candidate Trump, as well as Bernie Sanders. In other words, trying to manipulate the American electorate. And in fact, they are still out there following this shooting, this horrific shooting in Parkland, Florida. A whole bunch of Russian bots started the NRA kind of groups and hashtags and, saying no to gun control. It is astonishing the impact of these things. And the fact that the President of the United States has disregarded all of his security advisors, CIA, national security, every one of them has said that the Russians have done this. Not a one of them is saying that the election was turned on these, which is the only thing this president seems to be concerned about. But the fact that an outside country is invading our public consumption of news and what is considered media Why this isn't number one threat to the U.S. is, to me, treasonous, really. It is honestly like there is a nuclear bomb on its way, except that it doesn't detonate in one big explosion. It just slowly infects every day. So I experienced this hacking. It was costly to correct it, and hopefully in the next few days it will be corrected, but it'll be almost a week. And that's just little old me trying to clear it up. Imagine this country. And so, my politics are no secret to this audience, but wow. The stakes just keep getting higher and higher. And I really do believe Marge got the right advice from Homer. It does take two to lie. One to lie and one to listen. And those who are listening to these lies and thinking they're the truth, you're lying to yourself. Save yourself, really. This is not going to end well. So, that's it. My little bit on liars. There was one other quote, and I rather liked it, and I don't know who this is. It's Goodman Ace. I have to look him up. And I feel like this is what I've been doing since November 2016. And the quote is this: I keep reading between the lies. So I have to keep reading between the lies I tell to myself too about weight control. And I'm sort of happy that I told myself some hard truths this week, and hope you can relate to some of them and find some of them valuable to think about. And hopefully I'll get this mess cleared up with the podcast. And let me just encourage you to sign up on my email list on the ArtoftheDiet132 so that I'm able to communicate to you without those nasty Russians taking over. Okay, take care.